Welcome to the Stewardship Leader Podcast, brought to you by the Christian Stewardship Network. CSN exists to teach and equip church leaders the biblical perspective on finances so they can speak with authority, confidence, and integrity. To learn more, visit us at christianstewardshipnetwork.com. Well, hey everyone, welcome to Stewardship Leader. I'm your host, Leo Sabo, and today I have the pleasure of having Joseph Flagey with us. He's from Martis Solutions. He's the Director of Service Delivery. Joseph, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, Leo, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Well, you guys have been a great partner. We love what you guys do, love your software, and wanted you to come on and share a little bit more about what Martis does, how you guys work with churches, and what solutions you are bringing to churches, which I think is really vital for our network of churches to know about and to engage with. Let's start with talking about Martis Solution, who you guys are, what you do, and then also maybe start out with who you are, how long you've been there, what's your background, and then tell us about Martis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Martis, we are a cloud-based software that's going to provide streamlined budgeting, forecasting, and reporting solutions for our clients. A lot of times we see organizations struggling through spreadsheets, creating budgets. Could be a very cumbersome process to manage all those spreadsheets. And so we try to alleviate those pain points as we're working with them. Martis, we integrate with accounting software. And so it allows them to really seamlessly collaborate across budgets and forecasts and have user-friendly screens for the people that are non-financial people to be able to track budget versus actuals as they go through the year. Martis as a company, we were actually started back in about around 2008 with churches in mind. Our founder and CEO, Bill Cox, he has a son who is a pastor and was working through budgets one year and basically said, there's got to be a better way to do this instead of in spreadsheets. And so being the entrepreneur that our CEO is, that's where Martis started. So we love helping churches with budgeting and reporting, have a great focus on faith-based organizations in general, and just a real heart to serve nonprofits as well. Myself, my role here, as you mentioned, Director of Service Delivery. So overseeing our professional services through implementations, onboarding of our customers, customer support, customer success. I've been here 3.5 years. First started as a consultant implementing our solution with our customers, but I actually learned about Martis in a prior company I worked for where we implemented and consulted on some specific accounting software. And so we'd have clients that would integrate Martis, with that software to do their budgeting and forecasting and reporting there with their teams. I've also, before that, I spent about 9.5 years working on church staff. So I came in as a missions intern, my wife and I, with the intent of going out to be missionaries on the mission field. And just through circumstances and time, we ended up staying there for, like I said, about 9.5 years. And then about the last 4.5, I spent there in working with the finances and overseeing ministries.
Well, I love your ministry background and so how connected Martis is to obviously to the cause of the church and helping the church do it so much better than, well, gosh, the way we did it. I also served on staff at a church for many years, and I was the guy who was charged with managing the budget of our department. And yes, we did use a spreadsheet, unfortunately, and it was a lot more time and work than I needed to put in. So I'm so grateful that you guys exist. I wish you would have been available, or that I would have known about you when I was at my position as a pastor of stewardship many years ago. So, but thankful that you guys are doing what you're doing, that you're providing this. I think it's a useful, not just useful, a vital tool to manage things well. I see so many churches that still continue to use spreadsheets, even though they have a budget. The way it's managed in each department and how that's done, I don't think we're as efficient. So, I have some suspicion that there are some insufficiencies going on in church because we experienced it at our church. But I'm curious, how many, or roughly, how many churches do you work with, and do you notice any common threads as it relates to stewardship and how they manage resources?
Sure, yeah. So Martis, we serve a little over 850 organizations right now that's 850 using our software, about 30,000 plus users across those organizations. I've personally been involved with or overseen several hundred of those. As far as churches specifically, about 30% of those 850 are in that church segment. So we've seen a recurring theme across our clients, related to stewardship, how they're managing their resources for our churches and even other faith-based organizations specifically. I think they come to it with a heart of, what the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 4:2. It's required of stewards that they be found trustworthy or faithful. And so, that's really our highest calling, faithfulness, trustworthiness, and all that we've been entrusted with in all areas of our lives. And if we think about it in terms of how we manage the finances in the church or, the organization, that calling and motivation to be faithful stewards, to be trustworthy managers is there. But the tools that are being used can often make it difficult to be effective and efficient, like you were saying. So, thinking about it in terms of like budgeting and reporting, most of our clients have been working in those spreadsheets to some degree. And, they've really outgrown those spreadsheets and it just becomes a big hassle, passing them back and forth, worrying if you had the latest version, trying to figure out what formula or cell reference got broken. And it's just difficult and time consuming to send out reports even to those ministry leaders or the board. So, their time is directed more towards managing the spreadsheets and pulling it all together, and less time is being spent on analysis and strategic planning, making sure that the priorities are getting set that are going to support and really grow the ministry.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. So where does Martis come into all of this?
Sure, yeah. So at the beginning, I was mentioning, we provide that streamlined budgeting, forecasting, and reporting solution. So, a collaborative platform for ministry leaders, finance and accounting staff, and so on, to help ministries really bridge the gap between their mission and their finances. Last month, our CEO and founder Bill Cox, he wrote an article for CSN that's titled "Beyond the Numbers," and he gave an example that I read about in there that really kind of resonated with me. He said, and I want to quote, creating a budget should primarily focus on establishing financial priorities that align with the ministry's mission. And here's the example. He said, while collaborating with a church leader on their initial church budget, we identified numerous expense items that lacked any discernible benefit to the ministry. These expenses were allocated to activities that persisted solely due to tradition, without anyone questioning their contribution to the ministry's objectives. Meanwhile, more impactful opportunities remained unfulfilled due to funding limitations. And so this example just highlights the importance of thoughtful collaboration and really honest discussions that can lead to a more focused and mission driven financial strategy. So that's where Martis comes in. They provide that user friendly, collaborative budget platform to have those conversations.
Great. So let's dig into that. Talk about budgeting. Exactly what is collaborative budgeting?
Yeah, good question. Sometimes I think it's maybe good to understand what something's not first. So I'm going to start there. Collaborative budgeting, I would say, is not purely traditional, the traditional top-down approach to budgeting. Let me explain what I mean by that. I think a lot of us could be familiar with the top-down approach. This is where senior leadership is creating the budget. They might have a conversation or two with some of those ministry leaders, but for the most part, they're determining the budget based on overall goals that they're setting for the church. So in other words, there's just a little input from others outside of the senior management team and finance office. Now, contrast that with the collaborative budgeting approach. Collaborative budgeting dives into the concept of a bottom-up approach. And this is where we're starting to engage all of the relevant stakeholders. So think of people, like the ministry leaders, department managers, program managers, and maybe some others that are really those boots on the ground type of people, extremely valuable people who are in the day-to-day thick of things. These are the people that are important in this budget creation process, along with management. They're the ones that are closest really to the day-to-day operations. And so there's a lot of benefits to collaborative budgeting strategy and really bringing in all those relevant stakeholders.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So can collaborative budgeting be done using spreadsheets?
I would say yes and no, and I'll start with the yes side of that answer. I think most people probably listening in, you've probably seen or been a part of a process that utilize either Excel or Google spreadsheets. Each department manager, they may have their piece of the pie, right, for the areas that they're responsible for, and they send that sheet back to the person in charge of putting everything together. Um, but remember, in a collaborative environment, there's more than one person involved in the process, and so that's where The shift comes in for the second part of my answer, the no side. I would propose the question: is sending out spreadsheets to 5, 10, 15, 50, 100 plus people always the most efficient and effective? How can we get, for instance, real-time insight from all those different areas and see how each person's work is affecting the bottom line of the budget? We've worked with Kelly Benton recently. She's the director of accounting at the Church of the Highlands, and she described it like this for us. And I got a permission to quote here. She says, prior to Martis, we weren't using a budgeting software at all. All budgets were prepared and tracked via Excel spreadsheets, which significantly hindered accessibility, collaboration, scalability, and reliability. She said the accounting department had to manually create budget reports and send them to each campus and department. During budgeting season, each campus had to send budget approvals via Excel through email for approval, since there was no system to send them through. Once accounting had received all those budget proposals for each campus and department, we had to manually combine them together to create a consolidated operating budget report. And so what I'll say here is it's hard for someone to approve or deny a request, as they go through that planning process, if they don't have visibility into the bigger picture. So working in spreadsheets can be very slow and a very manual process to get everybody's work together and really see that big picture. And one other thing I might add is the increasing propensity for errors, right? From the Borkum formulas and cell references, from all those spreadsheets. It's just a very painstaking process, and so much more as the organization grows as well.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're bringing me back to the days when we had to do that process you just described. I think that's just instinctive what churches do. They pull up Excel, they create it, they send it out to every department. They have a proposed, here's the amount you have, spread it out however you want. And it's just the whole process is so labor intensive. And the worst thing about it is that most of us who were in our department, especially and in other departments, Excel was just not something that we all learned to do. It was just we had to learn to use this tool in order to just get information across. And yeah, they protected the cells and did all that, but it was just a mess of a process, and it was so labor intensive, and I didn't look forward to it. It was honestly sometimes weeks of work to finalize the whole process, and I just thought it was just not an effective way to run things. So, how does a budgeting and reporting tool differ from a spreadsheet?
Yeah, well, I think you can do a lot of things in a spreadsheet, right? It has its strengths and it has its weaknesses that we mentioned just a little bit ago. But when you move to a budgeting and reporting tool like Martis, a couple of the goals would be to centralize all the stakeholders on the same platform. Have a consistent process and workflow with approvals and controls in place, so that people are going to be working on the same version. We hear that all the time in spreadsheets. Did I get the right version from that user? They sent me version 5 and I'm looking at version 3, so making sure everybody's on that same version, versus the spreadsheets. And also another big thing here is when someone's working in a platform like Martis, restrictions on those users so that they're only seeing the areas that you want them to see. So the reporting tool is going to handle all this for them. And then there's automations too, right? Within a tool versus a spreadsheet, there's just automations that are inherently built into, for instance, Martis to reduce those errors and really streamline the consolidation process of everybody's work. Going back to something Kelly Benton said, again, Church of the Highlands here, she said this: accountability was huge. She said, accountability. She said, we're now able to truly enforce budgets because everyone who spends money on behalf of the church has access to Martis and is fully equipped and resourced to help us be good stewards of the resources we've been blessed with. Everyone has access to the same financial information, so increased transparency, which promotes trust and allows us to enforce accountability. And that's just something that was very difficult, to do in spreadsheets.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So how does Martis differ from like accounting software that a business may already be using?
Sure, yeah. So you got your accounting software, then you've got Martis, right? We're a third party that's going to quote unquote plug in to the accounting software because not everybody's going to have access to the accounting software, right? Those ministry leaders, they don't have access to that software. So, we're going to plug into that software. We're going to pull data, from the accounting system so that, in Martis, they can see the transactions that have taken place for their area of ministry compared to their budget. Even what we could do at Martis too, for instance, I'm thinking of like scenario planning when we're creating different budgets. You might have a couple of different versions you go through before it lands on that final approved budget. That's just not something that accounting software is really set up to use or to be used for.
All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about reporting because Martis also offers a pretty robust reporting tool. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, sure. So, typically the accounting software is going to have some reports there already, but as we just said, users don't typically have access there. So, clients are coming to us looking for, great budgeting and forecasting tools. But then when they find out that we have variance reports available to them as well, it's kind of like icing on the cake for them. So I mentioned how we integrate with the accounting software, and being that we're really tied to it, we're pulling in those details from the general ledger, from the GL, for the reports inside of Martis. And the idea here is users in Martis can log in and get on-demand reports for the areas that they're responsible for. Keeping in mind, right, they're going to be restricted, maybe to a specific ministry or specific campus and so on. And so, they're only going to see what we want them to see. And so there's going to be like some pre-built reports, lots of flexibility in how they might modify the views to better analyze the activity there. We also have like a custom report builder to build custom reports, and cash flow forecasting is another option. Just some things that the accounting software typically does not offer that Martis here is bringing to the table.
I like that you can decide which information is needed for which group. That's important so that people aren't, again, you're not overwhelming them as they might be with the spreadsheet. Now, some people might say that a report is just a report. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so I would say that there's always going to be some that just see numbers. But I would say that numbers really do tell a story. For instance, as we start doing that variance analysis, budget versus actuals, we may see a trend. If a new forecast maybe that we might need to do, something that's going to affect cash flow. And so those numbers that we're seeing in the budget versus actuals or a new forecast, those numbers have assumptions behind them, something that we're going to be responsible for. And so those numbers are telling a story, and they're going to give us metrics that maybe we can measure performance against. They may suggest adjustments that we need to make in our strategies or the tactics that we're working together as a team. And so building a budget or a forecast, running a budget versus actual report, or creating a new forecast is really about proactively managing and leading the church along a path of performance and execution of those strategies to achieve their goals. So the story being told by the numbers, those numbers should lead us to some kind of action as we identify, some risks or other opportunities. They help it really inform the team at the church, right, of the trajectory if we're going to hit our goals or if we need to make some adjustments, right, along the way to really deliver on the mission and objectives there for the church there.
Yeah, I definitely see the value of that. I mean, I think sometimes, as I think back to my days of being on staff, how sometimes we would look at the budgeting process as a way to just get approval to get a certain amount of money for the following year and the ministry we wanted to do. But the thing that we lacked and frustrated me was the fact that we didn't have a way to know how are we doing. In fact, I was kind of tasked with making sure that we stick to our budget. So, if our expenses were higher, if let's say we were doing Financial Peace University and we had X amount of kits that we bought from Dave Ramsey and we needed to buy more, but we didn't budget for more, I'd have to figure out, okay, how do we move this around? And so not doing the reporting, not having a way to do reports because we just use Excel, and then also not having a way to track it, made it very difficult to know, are we actually meeting our objective? Are we exceeding what we were doing, what we were planning on doing? Are we meeting what we're hoping to do? And is it still on mission
Yeah.
of what we're doing? So I can definitely see how this reporting can really help you, not just visually, but really see whether what you're doing and how you're doing it is bringing you to that purpose of a mission that you have. So
Yeah. Yeah, it really drives home that transparency and accountability, across the team, holding them to what they budgeted for and keep them on track. So, yeah, absolutely.
and I also saw something else that this could help in, and that is that when you create the budget, yes, that we have different departments, different campuses, this is a pretty large church, and sometimes, again, I was the one tasked with managing the budget, but I didn't know if somebody was spending money
Mm,
until it
yeah.
was too late, right? I wouldn't find out until the money's already been spent. So looking back and seeing, well, gosh, I had no idea that this expenses were already made. Now we have to kind of pivot and figure out how to get through it. So I can definitely see reporting as being a huge thing. I'm sure there's people out there who can run reports on Excel. I'm not one of those, and I would say I'm an average Excel user, and that's why this software would be so much better for churches and organizations that are really trying to stay on mission. All right, so tell me, are there any trends as far as budgeting and reporting that you're seeing as you're working with different churches?
Yeah, I think a lot of times what we're seeing is, they want to do some additional forecasting or, amendments as they move through the year. Kind of that once and done approach to budgeting seems to be really a diminishing reality. That's where essentially you're creating a budget, it gets approved, you manage to that without any changes the whole year. I think we're seeing, as organizations become more dynamic and fluid, it really necessitates this idea of that reforecast. We'll have clients that will do like a mid-year reforecast. Some will do it quarterly. We even have some that will do it monthly as things change so much. And so, with all these different variables that are around us that continue to evolve and really modify this landscape that we're living in, we've got to be able to pivot quickly and factor in maybe a new strategy, or maybe there's a new funding source that we didn't plan for at the beginning. Now we can and have some more ministry opportunities with it. And so being able to modify and update the underlying assumptions is something that we're really seeing a lot more of. Again, going back to those reforecasting options. Um, a really good tool is going to allow you to do that and quickly create those forecasts without having to recreate the whole wheel again. And I mentioned that because we do have clients that come, again, they're coming from spreadsheets like, man, we really have tried that in Excel or Google Sheets, but it's just so time consuming to get it all set up and do that whole process again. So, coming to a software like Martis, gives them additional opportunities to be more flexible, I guess, as they move through the year. Not changing the original budget, but maybe making some new plans as they're going through the year.
I can definitely see that being much easier than jump back into the spreadsheet and doing it that way. So, what are some of the questions organizations, churches can ask themselves to ensure that they're choosing the right budgeting software for their organization?
Yeah, so I think there's several things to think through as you're looking to make a change or an update here. And one of those, probably just is a given, really, is that I would think about our current pain points, right? Ask yourself where are our pain points, because what that's going to do is going to allow you to ask good questions, ask the right questions to see how a certain budgeting solution can meet those needs. So, first, ask yourself, what those pain points are. Second, I would also say, is it cloud-based? That might be a given, right? I think over the last 15, 20 years, these companies were moving to the cloud. Martis was born in the cloud back in 2008, and so, but there's still some out there that might not be in the cloud. That's something everybody's really headed to, but you want to make sure of. Another thing would be, how does it integrate with our accounting software, with our ERP? What does that integration look like? Is it an API? Is it file based? In other words, what's being pulled and pushed? How can things be imported or exported if that's needed? Even does it have its own API? Can I extract data from Martis or another system? Going back to the reporting side, is it real time? When my users log in, are they going to get reports that are real time so they can track their budget as they move through the year? You might ask about limits, even. Is there a limit to the number of budgets that we can create, or scenarios, or forecasts, even just budget lines, because there are systems out there that they're going to have their limits. So ask what those limits are. Strategically, I would think about the time to value. There's a cost associated with this. Some of that's time, and some of that's just the price of the software. So, what does it cost? What do I get? How long does it take before I can even start using it? Is it going to be user friendly? We have customers, that got up to 400 users in the system, and they're non-financial staff. So look at that user friendliness for people that are non-finance related. How quickly can they get up to speed? And then last, but I would say certainly not least, you might ask about the security. And when I think about security, there's a couple things that we could talk about at a very high level. Ask about the SOC 2 compliance. Are they going to store and process your data in a secure manner? Have they passed that SOC 2 audit? Is it current? And then maybe at a more granular or user level type of security, what does that look like for users in the system? What kind of permissions and restrictions can we apply to them so that when they get access to, say, Martis, they're only going to see what we want them to see. They don't need to be seeing every other ministry's activity. So, there's that question on the, I guess, enterprise level type of security, SOC 2 compliance, and then what does it look like at the user level as well? So I answered that last question with a couple other questions, but just some things I think that might be helpful as you're considering maybe some changes there.
Yeah, that's great. I do have one additional question for you. If somebody were to give you a call and say, "Hey, I'm interested in learning more about Martyrs, the software, or how to use it within my own church, maybe or organization," what would that intro process look like? How would you guys kind of walk them through? You said you work with churches and you spend quite a bit of time with them. Tell our listeners what would that experience be like for them?
Sure, yeah. So our website, www.martissolutions.com, you can request a demo there. That's really where we start. We will start with a little bit of discovery. Our sales team will they'll do a little discovery, understand your needs, where you're coming from, and then schedule a demo afterwards. And so through that demo, you're going to see what Martis looks like, how the software functions. Ask questions through that demo. What does this mean for us? We do X, Y, Z. What would that look like in Martis? And so you'll get that discovery, you'll get a demo, and they can further talk about other kind of next steps as it relates to the onboarding process, what that implementation looks like, and how we would work with you and your team through that process as well.
Joseph, one more thing. How would you communicate the value that this could be for their organization?
Yeah, so I would consider the time that is being spent on very remedial tasks, just trying to manage the spreadsheets and making sure everything is right. Martis is going to remove a lot of that time-consuming processes that are happening now, and really work with you and the team to fully embrace a more streamlined budgeting and reporting process. The team at Martis, just kind of talking from our experiences and our backgrounds, a lot of our team has had church experience or other faith-based organizations. We have lots of experience, just nonprofit in general, and so that's really our sweet spot, right? We've experienced it ourselves. We've seen hundreds of clients experience what these churches are going through, and so just being able to understand and relate, when we talk about um, things like housing allowances, right? We understand what a housing allowance is and things like that. And so the value that we offer is not just in the products, a very robust product, but in the personnel that we have in our teams as well, with a heart for, churches, faith-based organizations, and other nonprofits.
That's great. I think that's your greatest asset. Although you do have wonderful software, but you've got a great team. As I've gotten to know them, I know you guys have a heart for ministry. That's the value add that I think people should consider as they're thinking about adding this software, to the organization. I think it's kind of a no-brainer. If you've been using spreadsheets, this is a software that will make your life much easier. The time that you'll save, the clarity you'll gain, just think it's something you need to strongly consider. Joseph, any last thoughts or comments you'd like to make?
Well, I just want to thank you, Leo, for having us. It's really been an honor and a privilege to be on here. And as as a Christ follower myself, and stewardship of everything, being a steward of everything that the Lord's given to us, I appreciate you letting us share with your listeners and being able to present Martis a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely. And we'd love being a partner with you guys and everything that you do. So thank you for your partnership with us and our network of churches. I would also like to thank you, our listener, for taking the time to listen to this episode. I hope it was a benefit to you and that you'll share it with others who may also benefit from this content. If you'd like to know more about CSN, please visit us at christianstewardshipnetwork.com. We have many resources focused on stewardship and generosity in the local church, including a membership specifically designed for stewardship leaders or church teams. Come and join a community of leaders who are leading stewardship and generosity ministries in their church. Learn from the best and most generous group of leaders you'll ever meet, who share their experiences, knowledge, and resources so you can build and run a healthy stewardship and generosity ministry in your church. Our CSN Annual Forum is just around the corner, being held at Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, March 3rd through the 5th, 2025. This 3-day event is the best place to connect and learn from the best stewardship and generosity leaders in the country. And if this is your first time, we highly recommend attending the pre-forum Stewardship Impact Workshop. There's no better teaching to help you understand the theology of stewardship and generosity and the practical application of these in your church. You can learn more about this great event on our website, christianstewardshipnetwork.com/events, or email us if you have any questions at info@christianstewardshipnetwork.com. Thanks again for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Stewardship Leader.